August 22nd. Call to order, roll call. Everyone present? Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, excuse me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Identify possible conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest this evening? Seeing none, move on to item D, public comment period correspondence. At this time, I will recognize those members of the public who have indicated a desire to address the council. Upon recognition by me, persons may address the council first stating their name and address. The council may act on emergency matters introduced by members of the public. And you'll have 5 minutes from when you state your name. Our first is Jean Kelly.
Yeah. I think there's a button on the mic. There's a button on the mic.
Hi, Jean Kelly, 407 East 21st Street, Marshfield. I want to begin by offering my thanks to the Marshfield Fire and Police Departments. On Sunday, August 13th, my carbon monoxide alarm went off, and I called 911, and the quick and polite response was amazing. It turned out to be harmless, more of a problem with my alarm, but the firemen checked with their meters and all was good. Both the police officer and the firemen were professional, informative, and very courteous. We all are fortunate to have them employed here in the city of Marshfield. My comment this evening is in reference to the tax increase assessment. As a previous homeowner and now a renter, I'm very concerned not so much about the assessed values, as many seem to be below the national averages and have remained that way for some time in some cases. I'm concerned as to what the new mill rate will create if it's set at an amount which will further the housing crisis that we now face. To break it down, after my conversation with the assessor's office, I understand that there are 4 entities involved in setting the mill rate: the city, the county, the school district, and the technical college. Each one is allotted a piece and each sets its own mill rate. I understand the city can only set a rate for the city. The mill rate affects all citizens, homeowners, business owners, and renters alike. The Federal Reserve raised the interest rates in July of this year and are considering another possible hike in September. Home buying and maintaining homes, including rental units, which will cause costs to be out of reach for an average Marshfield citizen if the mill rate is not set at a livable rate. This setting of the mill rate will affect everyone's property taxes. Any large increases in taxpayer responsibility, along with any continuing rise in utility fees, will in turn directly affect personal spending, much of which will also be needed to maintain our food and housing. I know our fire and police are stretched. Life has become more complicated now. We have roads to fix, and the increase in materials are a definite consideration. It's a hard balance, but I'm asking the council, the school district, and the technical college to consider a fair and equitable mill rate that will not put families and those on very limited incomes at risk. To the citizens, I ask you to do your work and be aware of which section of the mill rates cost us the most from the 4, and to personally assess if the cost benefits you as a taxpayer. Is that my time?
Nope, no, it's not. Sorry, we're not sure what's going on.
Most people do not want to burden the system anymore by relying on federal or state assistance to pay utility bills and other programs to sustain their lives. That leaves it up to this council, the school, the technical college, and the county to set the mill rate at a point that can balance these needs for the citizens of Marshfield without putting citizens over the edge. Respectfully, thank you for your time and serious consideration regarding the mill rate.
Thank you, Jean.
Maybe just hold off for a minute.
We'll hold off just for a minute while Ian hangs up the phone. How do we get this?
I will.
Okay, thank you. Modern technology, but look who fixed it, obviously, our IT guy. Thank you, Ing. And our second speaker, Karen Miller.
Karen Miller, 203 Columbus Drive. We also have multiple properties in downtown Marshfield. I guess since there's a lot of police and fire here, thank you for, was it Saturday's fire? That was rough, but everybody is doing well. Apart from the mill tax rate that everybody's going to be talking about, because I know you all have invested interest in it yourselves because you're all property owners of Marshfield. The one thing I would like to address is the bid tax that's going to be increased, or that's going to be voted on to be increased here in Marshfield. I completely support it. The increase is, I believe, 3% increase. It has been increased since 2008. It should have been increased probably in regular intervals from the beginning. And those funds really do help Marshfield. They get funneled to Main Street. They go to Hub City, Main Street. Sorry, I don't really have organized notes. Main Street then does Farmers Market, downtown trick-or-treating, and they help people, the business owners that come to them, navigate through the grants and the funds that are provided to you guys by the city. So it really needs more of a cushion, and I don't think what they're asking is unreasonable. So I'm just here to support it.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment? Any other public comment? And one more time, any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to item E. Approval of minutes from the August 8th, 2023 meeting. Do I have a motion and a second? Motion by Alderman Giles, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Stauber?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Item F, staff updates.
Sarah Dressel, our HR director sitting next to me here, has an update on an item that is on the consent agenda, kind of a follow-up from the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee meeting of last Tuesday. And I'll let her take it away as she heads over to the podium.
Thank you. So last week at the Finance, Budget, and Personnel meeting, there was a position that was introduced. It is a merging of the Ordinance Enforcement Officer position with parts of the duties that normally would have gone to an Associate Planner position. Basically, it was a merging of that position into one, so taking tasks and kind of merging them together. So that new position is called a zoning administrator / ordinance enforcement officer. So that did get approved by the committee to come before this body through the consent agenda for final approval. But as part of that presentation, I did mention that I was going to bring to this group what the compensation would look like based on the fact that the ordinance enforcement officer position is at a pay grade 124. The associate planner position was at a 128. So it would be somewhere in between is kind of what the feeling was as far as compensation goes. So once things moved forward last week, what I did do is followed up with McGrath. They had already kind of looked at it as part of the process with new positions. So they looked at it, got back to me, and so I can provide for you tonight. Essentially what it's looking like is it's going to fall somewhere between a pay grade 126 or a 127. It would be at the high end of a 126, a low end of the 127, somewhere in there. That being said, The final determination will be obviously once we have all of the comparables for the study completed. So we would have good information from other municipalities that are our comparables. But as far as wages go, where our ordinance officers currently are, would be able to fit within that wage. So I just wanted to make sure that I presented that prior to the approval of the consent agendas. So just wanted to give the heads up as promised.
Thank you, Sarah. Steve, anything else?
That's all we have for staff updates tonight.
Item G, my comments, employee recognition, Jacob Maxson, Police Department, 5 years. Congratulations, Jacob. And Jessica Schiffrel, City Clerk, who is out doing some training. She is here 5 years already. So congratulations to both of these 5-year people. Item H, council comments. Any comments from council? Seeing none, city administrators update.
Thank you. I've got a couple things. First of all, I want to do a shout out here to Jean. I think you made some very good comments when you were at the podium under citizen comments, and I'm going to kind of dovetail a little bit on that by talking a little bit about the city-wide revaluation. And people have gotten their notices now. I know council is getting some phone calls. The assessing department certainly is getting phone calls. I want to touch on some of the highlights just to kind of confirm what is and is not going on with the revaluation, kind of put some information out there. First of all, the last one was done in 2010. So you're looking back 13 years. That accounts for a fair amount of what you're seeing in terms of the increase. Think of what's happened in property appreciation in the last 13 years. Also, it's the recent sales of comparable properties that are looked at in many cases whenever they're available. The changes are based on sales and market data. So it's really comparing what different types of properties are selling for, what they have been selling for, if they're transactions that are comparable. The city's tax collection is based upon the what levy limits allow. That's a state program that says basically you can't levy really any more than you levied from the taxpayers the year before, except for minor increase for growth. There's also a debt component, but for the most part, we're limited to a very small increase over the previous year. Last year was 0.55%. So no matter if everybody's valuation in this room goes up by 50%, 70%, whatever, we're only allowed to collect a very small amount, at most more than we did last year. So there's not this big windfall some people think is coming to the city as a result of increased property values. The increase in valuation does not necessarily mean your taxes will go up. Basically, we're going to be recarving the existing pie. Yes, there'll be people who go up a little bit, those who go down a little bit, whatever, based upon how you compare with the average increase. But this is not about more revenue to the city. This is about equating the property values with the real actual sales and market data out there in terms of what your property is believed to be worth if you were to try and sell it. So with that in mind, I instruct people who have any questions, and I know there's a lot of questions out there, to call or email the city assessor's office. They're happy to meet with you. They've met with a lot of people so far in this office, out in the field, at their homes, whatever. They're happy to do that. They'll take a relook at it. Ultimately, you can go to the open book or the board of review if you still feel that you're not getting what you believe. But I've heard a lot of good conversations are coming from those dialogues with assessing staff. So please engage with them and give them a chance to talk about it with you and see if anything is off kilter. The next item I'd like to do under council or under city administrator's update is an update on recent council requests under agenda items for future meetings. We've had a lot of them in the last 3 or 4 months, so I went back and looked. There have actually been 20 independent requests made since late April, and it appears we've actually fulfilled 2/3 of them. I say fulfilled, either having something reported here, presented here, discussed here, or a memo sent out to the council that addressed the issue in question. We have a handful that we haven't gotten to yet, most of them from July meetings, and pledging to get back into those, get back the answers to council, either, again, via a memo or something here presented at the meeting in the month of September. And I apologize for that. We've just had a lot, and there's been a lot going on, but we have not lost sight of the things that you brought up. And then finally, my last update would be on the chicken ordinance, which was supposed to be on this agenda for second reading and adoption. It's not on here. There were a lot of comments made at the last meeting about everything from the feed cost to animal disposal to a lot of things. Still looking at some of those items and want to make sure I get it right. I've been kind of tied up with some other things along the way too, but that will definitely be on the September 12th council agenda for second reading. that's what I have tonight on City Administrator's update. Oh, yeah, all right, I will do that, since I still have the floor. The mayor would like me to thank the fire and police for their wonderful job on the fire on Sunday. I've heard such great things about the response, emails I've seen, things like that, the comments made earlier tonight about their response to that fire. So thank you to all the emergency personnel for your great effort on Sunday.
Thank you, Steve, for that update. Item J, reports from commissions, boards, and committees. Seeing none, we'll move on to item K, consent agenda. Meeting minutes reports. Motion by Alderman Fire, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mr. Sauber?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you, everyone. We can skip item L. Item M, second reading of ordinance number 1498, rezoning a portion of parcel 33-06973 from TR6 two-family residential to MR12 multiple family residential, presented by Steve Barr, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, as we often do in second readings, I won't go through everything that I did the first time, but I will kind of hit on the highlights. This is for the property south and east of 21st Street and Washington Avenue. It's a proposed development of some land for a housing project. And there's a portion of that on the southeast part of this development that would need to be rezoned in order to allow multifamily, what's presumed to be at this point 4-unit buildings, and to make that possible. So anyway, the change was mentioned by the mayor is from TR6 two-family residential to MR12, which would allow multifamily residential. This was supposed to be on the agenda for 2 weeks ago. It was pulled off because there was a question of a minor change that had to do with a legal description of the property being encompassed. That has been dealt with, that has been resolved, and staff is supportive of this. The Planning Commission was favorable back in July. So staff would recommend approval of ordinance number 1498 to allow the rezoning of the parcel in question to MR12 multifamily residential.
Through the screen, you get a first and second time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Whatever. You want that one?
Read. Motion by Alderman Werman, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, Alderman Wagner, you got under the wire there, Mr. Wagner.
I'm getting quick in my old age. Okay, the one thing, we're doing this on the basis of a request for some development that will eventually take place on there. Do we have a development agreement at this point, a signed development agreement between us and a developer on this parcel?
No, we don't. And it's a good clarification. I'm glad you brought that up. Rezoning is not tied to a particular project. I mean, the intent of this developer is to build some single family, 2-family, and 4-family units, but the rezoning is to make possible something other than the current zoning. And if this developer pulled away in September and said, I'm not interested anymore, this would make possible future multi-unit in that part of the parcel. So it's not tied to a particular developer, even though obviously there's someone interested in that project.
If I can continue, then basically, I thought one of the reasons you may have wanted some of the zoning changes were to accommodate this particular layout that we were looking at in that. So I can't see how you can say it's not attached to a developer.
Well, I mean, it will make it possible for that development to go forward. But what you're saying, if you approve this, is that the multifamily adjacent to the mobile home park to the south is an acceptable. I mean, when you look at a rezoning, what's around it, what's to the north, what's to the south, what's to the east and west, you would be saying that multifamily would be appropriate for that strip of land, no matter who was someday doing a project. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel a little uncomfortable not having a developer's agreement in hand, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I think the city attorney would perhaps chime in at some point about the fact that we don't want to get close to contract zoning. We have a developer interested, but the zoning applies regardless of whether or not this developer walks away. So, I mean, it's based upon what is believed to be appropriate land use for that parcel.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Otherwise, please vote.
Mr. Stauber?
Yes.
Motion passes. Item N, first reading of ordinance number 1500, amending section 2-62 of Marshfield Municipal Code, extending citation powers to humane officers, presented by Harold Wolfgram, City Attorney.
A couple of weeks back, a question had been brought to me regarding some of the authority of the humane officers. And as I looked at that, there was a concern about the way that our ordinance maybe didn't directly identify that the humane officers have citation powers. We do grant citation powers generally in the code, but because of the classification and the definition of humane officers under the statute, I felt it was best to specifically put into the code that they have those citation powers. That's what this ordinance does. In this one instance, you folks probably know I usually dissuade you from passing something without a second reading. This would be one time where that would be okay. I think everybody would have expected that they had those authority to write citations. And there's some benefit to that because the way that it currently exists is essentially humane officers would have to be out there, they'd have to make observations, go to a secondary officer to have them issue a citation. That would not have been expected when they were when the original ordinance was adopted under the humane officer provision in our code.
Can I get a first and second, then we'll have Mr. O'Reilly's comment? If we are voting on this? You tell me.
Or do you want a motion that is specifically to waive the second reading? When does that come in?
That would happen only if the body wished to do that. Again, I was only saying I normally would be strongly suggesting against that. This is one time where I think everybody would have expected it. I think even the public would have expected it.
Okay, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thank you. I guess I'd just like to make the motion to suspend the rules and move forward to approve this.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Alderman Wagner. Any other discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Hold on.
This one was not anticipated to be voted upon tonight, which is why it's not logged in, I'm guessing, to
How about we
system
just
that's
do
there.
why don't we just do
If the roll call.
a human vote?
Yep.
Okay. And then call the alderman, starting with Fire.
Alderman Fire? Alderman Werman?
Yes.
Alderman Tompkins?
Yes.
Alderman Varsho?
Yes.
Alderman Wagner?
Yes.
Alderman Stauber?
Yes.
Alderman Giles?
Yes.
Alderman Spiros?
Yes.
Alderman O'Reilly?
Yes.
Alderman Rigel?
No.
Thank you. Ordinance passes. Item O, request to authorize transfer from the general fund to the EMS fund.
That actually was just to suspend
Suspend
the
the
rules.
rules.
Now you'd have a vote on the
Okay.
motion to approve.
Alderman O, okay. Now we need a motion and a second to
Approve ordinance.
approve it. Thank you. Approve the ordinance.
1500.
Brian moves. And Mike seconds. Alderman Varsho moves and Alderman Fire seconds. Any other discussion? Wow. Seeing none, we'll take another human vote. I like that.
Yeah.
Alderman Fire?
Yeah.
Alderman Werman?
Yes.
Alderman Tompkins?
Yes.
Alderman Varsho?
Yes.
Alderman Wagner?
Yep.
Alderman Stauber?
Yes.
Alderman Giles? Alderman Spiros?
Yes.
Alderman O'Reilly?
Yes.
Alderman Rigel?
Yes.
Okay, now we can move on to item O. I apologize. Request to authorize transfer from the general fund to the EMS fund for the purpose of hiring, retaining 3 firefighter paramedics, presented by Jody Clemens, interim fire chief.
Good evening. First of all, I'd really like to thank the citizen comments that thanked us for our service, and also council for acknowledging that. My team really appreciates the kind words. They work very hard, so thank you for that. In your packet, you'll see a joint memo from myself and former Fire Chief Floody. I believe it shows the need, the funding source, and why I'm recommending the approval to annually transfer funds starting in 2024 budget from the general fund to the EMS enterprise fund to cover 3 firefighter paramedics' wages and benefits, allowing us to fill these positions in 2024. We have 3 vacant positions in the 2023 EMS enterprise fund budget. Those positions will remain vacant for the remainder of 2023 because the fund cannot support those positions. If approved, the general fund will transfer just under $312,000 to the EMS Enterprise Fund and allow the Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department to fill these positions in 2024. Last year, fire department staff, the Fire and Police Commission, Common Council recognized the need for additional staff with unanimous support for going to referendum for 9 additional firefighter paramedics. As you know, the referendum failed by 71 votes out of 6,000 cast. This year, the need again was recognized as we received support to apply for the SAFER grant for 9 additional firefighter paramedics. As most of you are aware, in 2022, we had our busiest year with over 4,000 calls for service. This year, we are on pace to have the second highest. Funding these 3 positions will get us back to staffing levels of 2021. With calls being more frequent and fires becoming more violent, now is not the time to reduce its staff. I believe we've shown a need to fill these positions. We have a funding source in 2024 in the form of the supplemental shared revenue payment of $1.03 million. The legislature has made it very clear in a few ways that they want the supplemental shared revenue to fund protective services. As former Chief Leddy stated in his portion of the memo in your packet, when State Representative Tony Kurtz spoke at the 2023 State Chiefs Association Annual Conference, he stated that the increase in shared revenue was intended to be allocated to fund public safety. The other way the legislature made it clear is the language in Act 12, specifically in Section 59. Within the section, it referenced maintenance of effort. Annually, the city will need to certify to the Department of Revenue that 2 of 4 categories have not decreased from the prior year to be eligible for full payment. 1, expenditures for fire protective services and even EMS. 2, number of full-time equivalent firefighters and EMS personnel employed. 3, level of training and maintenance of licensure for firefighters and EMS personnel. And 4, response times for fire and EMS adjusted for call location. If the funding is approved, we'd be able to certify in the first 2 criteria, helping ensure we continue to receive the total amount we are eligible for. If we do not certify, there is a monetary penalty. If you choose to support the fund, it shows the townships that we contract services with that the city is supporting the enterprise fund and EMS. Without additional funding, the enterprise fund cannot support additional staff. This plan has support of the Fire and Police Commission, Finance Department, and Administration. Approval will help us with direction for the 2024 budget process. Once again, I would recommend approval to annually transfer funds starting in 2024 from the general fund to the EMS Enterprise Fund to cover 3 firefighter paramedic wages, benefits, and allow the Fire and Rescue Department to fill these vacant positions in the 2024 budget.
Thank you. Alderman Fire makes a motion. Alderman Giles seconds. Alderman Wagner.
Thank you. We had some discussion about this in finance, budget, and personnel, and the way you just explained it is fine. That's what I'm looking at is the recommendation that was there. It said, I recommend approval to annually transfer funds from the general fund to the EMS Enterprise Fund to fully cover 3 firefighters, paramedic wages, benefits, and overtime, and allow the Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department to fill these positions in the 2024 budget. So I think I just want to make sure and get it on the record. What we were saying is we would replace the 3 that had not been, we left vacant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But the way this original memorandum of understanding came out was, it was annual transfer of funds to hire 3 firefighters. In other words, were you trying to go to get 3 in 24, 3 in 25, and 3 in 26? Is that what this says, or no?
It does not.
Thank you.
Alderman Werman?
Thank you for reading through that, and definitely appreciate former Chief Flooddy's comments as well. I did have several questions I just wanted to go through for some clarity. I remember when the referendum came up that some of those positions were backfilled or were proposed to be positions that had been there that we needed to backfill. Are these 3 those positions that were supposed to be backfilled, not new positions?
So part of the 9, it would have been 3 that were backfilled towards that, so.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking for that is I want to know, like, is that something that would already be in the budget? Like, wouldn't we have that funding if there were backfilled positions?
So if I get your question correct, these 3 positions have been in the budget since 2021.
Right.
And these were never filled. Once we had the issue with the enterprise fund, we did not fill those positions once employees left, so that we could keep the fund in good balance.
Okay, and that's what I'm asking is, like, so if we had planned for these positions, was the budget there for those positions and they just weren't filled, or was there no budget for those positions initially either?
If I can answer your question the best way that I can, these positions have been in the budget in that enterprise fund. But seeing the fund balance, we knew we could not support hiring those people because the fund could not handle that. So yes, they have been in the budget, but for us to be responsible for that fund, we did not fill them.
Copy. And then you mentioned the referendum, which I know was a big sticking point. There was a lot of discussion around that. Have you noticed a change in, like, calls and frequency since the referendum failed to now?
So in short, we are still having high call volume. We are, like I said, on pace to have the 2nd highest call volume in the history of the department.
Kind of a follow-up to Ed's comment and question as well. Is this a permanent allocation every year? Is there an end date to this? Or
there is not.
Okay. And then the last thing I had was the SAFER grant I saw in here as well. I know that's something that we've discussed a lot as a council. Do we know when we'll have an answer on that? And then as a follow-up to that, I see it mentioned that would not take this into consideration. So would we, as a council, still be approving to fund 3 positions no matter what, and then the grant would potentially add an additional 9?
So the first part of the question is September 30th is what we've been told is the deadline for the SAFER grant. If we were successful on that grant, once again, this allocation is going to be helpful for us for budgetary purposes moving on into 2024. I know that Alderperson Tompkins when we were discussing this in finance budget personnel talked about that exact example. I haven't spoken to the administrator on what we would do at that time, but that's when we would reevaluate. I know that Alderperson Tompkins talked about taking that money, putting it into a special fund for that, so that once the SAFER grant was over, we could maybe visit that again. But that's something that right now I'm really trying to get these 3 positions filled for 2024. And if we're hopefully successful on that grant, that'll be a good problem where we can come back here and be able to figure out the best plan moving forward.
Thank you.
Alderman Tompkins, and then Alderman Stauber.
I just have a clarifying question. You mentioned that this would be helpful for surrounding communities who do pay a fee to have EMS service. I think that might be slightly misleading. Because, and this was before my time, did the citizens of Marshfield support a referendum to pay for the new fire station that surrounding communities did not have their taxes increased for? I'm just wondering if we actually are supporting, with the fire station and maybe the levy that was put on that. So it just might be slightly misleading because I do feel like the citizens of Marshfield, their taxes are actually supporting it. I'm not quite sure if that's true or not, but I'm just wondering.
Steve can answer that
Yes,
question.
well,
for you.
we have contracts with each of the 13 towns and the village that we support by providing them with EMS services. And that contract is reviewed every year. In fact, I think there's maybe a 7% increase this last year in an attempt to keep up with the rising costs. That maybe doesn't answer your question, but what it does say is that we want to make sure that as our costs and expenses increase, that they're picking up their fair share. So as you look to the 2024 fall discussions about what they should pay in 2025, we'll again take a look at what our expenses are and what they should have to contribute.
Yeah, my point is, I feel like the citizens of Marshfield are contributing as well. They're just not contributing through that contract, but they're contributing because their taxes paid for the new fire station. And I think we're still paying for that, are we not? We're not?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we are. And I think if your point is, and again, I really apologize if I'm not getting your point, but if your point is, do citizens of Marshfield contribute to the fire and EMS operation? Yeah, they do. Obviously, they do a lot. I mean, the EMS is a separate enterprise fund, but you could talk about the station, you could talk about a few things. It's a matter of the fact that this would be a greater general fund contribution transfer would be to the operation. But the enterprise fund is intended to be self-sufficient, apart from tax revenue.
Alderman Stauber?
What Steve just said, well, thank you, everyone. What Steve just said was really the crux of my question, and I recall the fund being self-sufficient. So my question is, will the rates be adjusted to support the 3 additional positions?
I think that's something that'll have to be looked at in the annual discussions with the townships and the village. And we do look at what our costs are. So your point is well taken. As our costs increase for whatever reason, we need to reevaluate what we charge to the benefiting municipalities around us. It'd be hard to say what that means right now, but you're right. Adding 3 personnel back in would seem to fit into that equation.
Alderman Weigel?
So just to clarify here, first of all, thank you, Mayor. We would have to vote on this annually, correct? Each year we'd have to vote for the disbursement or the transfer of the funds to the EMS fund. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'll take that one too. You're not committing. I mean, we can talk about the intent of this is that it would be annually. Once we hire these 3 people, we want to keep these 3 people. We don't want to hire them and the next year say, you know what, let's let them go. It was a tough year. But you cannot commit this council and future councils to 2025, 2026, 2027 budget numbers. This council always has the right to deal with tough budget issues as they see fit. But you would be stating your intent that beyond 2024, you intend to keep these people on staff with the annual transfer coming from general fund.
Right, and I think that brings me to my next question then is if there is a change in the body of city council and 5 years down the road, the new people here decide not to approve that fund, where does that leave us then? Or it doesn't approve the transfer.
Yeah, if they decide not to approve the transfer from general fund to help support those positions, either the money would have to come from somewhere else to support those positions or, staffing levels would have to be looked at, which I hope we never get to. But there'd have to be a revenue source to supplement those salaries.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Spiros?
Thank you. I have a few things that I need to have clarified. There's a paragraph in your letter here, and it says, within Act 12, an annual certification of fire/EMS effort is required by the Department of Revenue. Maintenance of effort is cited within Section 59, stating that we need to certify 2 of the 4 categories have not decreased from the prior year, and you read through the categories. So do we get an annual amount of money from the Department of Revenue? I don't understand what's the implication if we don't meet 2 of the 4?
Sure. And I'm just going to let you know where my sites were, where I'm getting this from, not only from reading, the Act 12, but the League of Municipality, Tony Herkert had a presentation on July 19th And then also on August 11th of 23, they had a take one frequently asked questions for Act 12. So I just want to let you know that's where I'm getting this information from so that we're all on the same page. In short, shared revenue for the city is $4.4 million. The supplemental cost is $1.03 million for a total of $5.43 million. If we do not certify to the Department of Revenue, to the DOR, we could lose 15% of the total of not the supplemental of the total. So 15% of the 5.4 is just north of $814,000 is what we'd be, 814 and a half is what we would be potentially losing if we don't recertify that we are doing 2 of those 4.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that up a lot. I didn't know that was the shared revenue. I knew it was some funding source, but I wanted to be sure what you were talking about. So thank you for clarifying that. So that's a lot of money. Clearly, we need to make sure that we are able to certify. You said at least 2 of those 4 categories, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, because that would be a very expensive mistake if we did not do that. Couple of other things. The SAFER grant, just for clarification, is if granted, is for 3 years. But the increase in shared revenue, and maybe Steve can clarify this, the $1,030,000, not 1.7, which I've seen out in the public being thrown around. That's an incorrect number. So if you're reading that, that is false. But the $1,030,000, that is only guaranteed for 1 year.
Correct. I mean, there's indications they would like to continue that based upon the whole sales tax issue, but it's not guaranteed beyond 2024.
Okay, and we have not received that yet. We're expecting it soon, but we have not received it yet.
Well, the money will be for 2024. I don't know if we received formal notice that we're going to get it. I know we've heard that we're going to get it, but we're expecting formal notice. Every year we get formal notice of our shared revenue, our transportation aid through a letter. We're expecting to get something that says for 2024, you'll get the $1,030,000. But you're right. After that, it's not guaranteed.
Okay, I'm just wanting to clarify some things here. So, when does the contract with Marshfield Clinic Health System expire, and when will we be renegotiating those terms?
We just renegotiated and re-signed contracts for these transport services late last year. I'm forgetting the length of the term to look that up. I should know that offhand.
Do you know?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll find that out for you.
We're unsure of that. So I'm just going to put in my 2 cents worth here on that part of it. When we renegotiate that contract, we have to negotiate harder, much, much, much harder than we're doing, because we're bringing them business, folks. That's what we do. That's what our EMS does, right? They take them business. Yes, we're providing needed services to save people, but we're dropping them at the door of the Marshfield Clinic Health System and providing them a huge clientele. And I think that we have to take that into consideration. And I think that they need to start picking up more of the cost of this, because I think it's their obligation and I think it's their duty. And so I'm going to encourage that the next negotiation be much more hard-nosed. And if they don't like that, they can probably look for different services. And that's just how I feel about that. I don't feel like they're contributing their part to this. With that said, obviously we face a lot of other problems. We have an aging population. Most people are on Medicare or Medicaid. Medicare or Medicaid, they decide what they're going to reimburse us for. It doesn't matter how much work these EMTs do. There's certain reimbursements that come back. They did slightly bump that reimbursement up finally this year, from my understanding, but it was not a sufficient bump. But there's not anything we can do about that. Our hands are tied. That comes from the federal government. So between that and the fact that we also service a lot of people who are uninsured completely and do not have the abilities to pay their bill at all, or they may be able to contribute a little, but we end up having to write those bills off. All of that affects the bottom dollar in the amount of personnel we can hire. So those are, I guess, my main points is that I really want to negotiate that contract much harder next time. I do want the people to understand that this increase in shared net revenue is a one-time only. This is not an annual or reoccurring thing that's been promised to us. Hopefully, you know, we get it every year and it goes up every year, but we can't guarantee that. I think it's absolutely essential that we meet at least 2 of these 4 categories so that we don't receive an overall reduction in shared revenue.
Alderman Werman.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And you just said exactly what I was thinking, and that is hopefully. And I don't want to rely on hopefully. I don't, as a council, want to say, hopefully we get this next year, the year after, and the year after. I don't want to corner ourselves as a council or as a city into funding this every year. And I think that's what Councilmember Ragel was getting at as well. Like, does this end? What is is it the enterprise fund? Mm-hmm. Is that what it was? Yeah. It's supposed to be self-sufficient, right? Was the intent always to fund these positions out of there? And if so, I understand that we're short, but what is the plan to get that on track? I don't know if I have to go through and hit the amend button to propose something else, but I would very much like to know if we get this grant first. And I would also like to know if we don't get the grant and we can fund these positions, can we do it for 1 year and then revisit the following year rather than saying we're going to approve this unconditionally every year? It's just going to keep getting approved. Because that is my concern, is if that fund is supposed to fund that, then it should be funding that. And I understand we're at a deficit right now. You have to get there at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd just like to comment on that. Good questions all around here. If you look at the action item in the agenda for this, it actually says authorize general fund transfer in recommended 2024 budget. That means that the 2024 budget you'll see recommended coming from me on behalf of staff will include a transfer of $300,000 roughly to cover these 3 positions. You have every right to decide how to handle this even in the 2024 budget. You know, you may choose to say no to this as part of the discussions you have in October and early November. But the significance of this is, I think, because we've talked about this ever since prior to the referendum, that there's a desire on behalf of this body that I've always picked up to at least restore the 3 positions that have been held at bay since 2021. We have not refilled. And so these folks in the fire and EMS department need to be planning if they're going to, be expecting to refill these positions in early 2024. And they're looking for your intent as to all things being equal, all things considered. Do you expect to sign off on a 2024 budget that will include these monies? And is it your intent to continue this in future years, provided that you're able to do so? Everybody understands. I said this at finance the other day. Everybody understands that the world could collapse. We could have a financial disaster on our hands 12 months from now, and we have to deal with it budgetarily. But clarifying it's your intent to have these be in the budget, to approve them, to get these 3 people on board, and to continue this transfer in order to make possible having those folks continue to be members of our department once they're hired. So it's a significant event. Does it mean you have no choices going forward? No, it doesn't mean that.
I still have the floor. And I do want to reiterate to fire and police, I understand the need and I support the need. I just don't want to get stuck into a financial situation that ends up being foolish for us. And part of that would be, again, I know the delay in the grant. We're talking about a month and 8 days. And that would be my proposal to the council is consider, and again, if I need to hit the amend button to do that, I'll do that, but consider waiting until that first meeting come October so we know whether or not we received said grant before we approve 3 positions to pay for and then end up getting an approved potential 9. And then we can take action then. So do I need to hit amend or what is the process if I would like to pose that back to the council?
Do we have a motion?
We have a motion and a second.
Yeah, who made the motion? Second.
Motion by Alderman Fire, second by Alderman Giles.
I take a motion to amend?
I don't want to, if you want.
He's already made.
That would be.
You're making, yeah.
So if I make the amendment for clarification for the council, then we would have to then take a vote.
On that amendment.
And then on the amendment, and then we would vote after.
Yep.
Got it. So that will be my proposed amendment then. But it won't click, FYI.
Okay, Alderman Wagner?
I'll see if there's a second
Oh,
first.
okay, is there a second to Alderman Werman's amendment?
I'll second it just to get it on the floor.
Thank you.
Okay. We went through a lot with this EMS fund. And basically the problem with it is we don't get reimbursed for 100% of everything that comes out of what we bill. I think that I remember it was like every time the ambulance left the door, I think it was something like $1,020 in charges that went out. And when we billed that amount, but if it was a Medicare or Medicaid, we only got 35%. And I think Rebecca was right. I think there was an increase in the Medicare or Medicaid reimbursement, but it was only 3%. So it started out at $350, so 3% of that, about another $9, maybe $10 that we're having trouble with. The real, one of the things that I sort of felt a little queasy about in this whole thing was they were actually naming the enterprise fund, or, it was going to be transferred. I think the original plan was to take 312,000, was that it? 312 or 317,000 from the general fund and deposit it into the EMS fund. To some extent, that's almost like a black hole, because we don't know what that's going to be. We don't know what the losses are going to be. On the bright side, if there really is one, to the gap between what we're going to get paid for the ambulance service and what we charge for it, it's that there's a possibility that the loss won't be as great in the future. I think we wrote off, I think, over $800,000 in 6 years of bad debt that we couldn't get on the thing, and that made a big dent in the EMS budget itself. So what I'm seeing here is, and what I think we may evaluate at the end of each year is what was the profit and loss on the EMS fund itself, and how much do we have to fund to make up for it? And that may be, that may be the equivalent of 3 firefighters. It may be the equivalent of 2 3/4 or 2.5, whatever, but it could be something like that. So I think you were on the right track in this, and finding a way of funding it, or of talking about it where we're funded. I had to, in finance, budget and personnel committee, I had to have it clarified over and over again that every year we would make that decision. We wouldn't be trying to lock the council into a 10-year, 9-year, 3-year plan or whatever. So I'll support your amendment on that basis. And I thank you for the floor, Madam Chair.
Alderman Stauber?
2 questions for the chief, and just one statement. I'd like the amendment clearly restated before we vote on it. For you, Chief Clement, what is the time frame for onboarding and training up new hires? And second question is, since we've been going, with the 3 crew member void for some time, what is the impact to your remaining crew, specifically retention, recruitment, any impacts in that regard, having a lighter staff?
Thank you for those questions. First, let's make sure I got these in the right order here. Number one, the impact to our staff has been overtime. The 3 people that were missing from our staff, that impacts overtime quite a bit, because obviously our workforce has vacations, things like that. If that gets compounded with an injury or a sickness, we're calling people in. The other impact that it has is on response. In short, it'd be 1 less person in a response during a daily an alarm. As far as recruitment and retention, I wouldn't have any hard data on that. But I will tell you this much, that our crews, we have been telling them, and they have been very responsive, that we are going to try to get them help. We're going to try to get those 3 positions back, and they have been very good about it. But it is difficult when you have to come in off duty a lot. And respectfully speaking, Yep, y'all can look at me. I got the gray hair. I'm the oldest one in the department, been there the longest. When I first started, a lot of people was very competitive coming in for overtime. Right now, with the workforce, not fire service overall, it's very difficult to get people to come in for overtime. So it's very tough for us to supplement when we need response with people coming in off duty. Plus, as you understand, on responses, having people there on scene right away is the key a lot of times to success. Going back to your first question about onboarding, there's a bunch of variables there. We have an ongoing hiring process through our website. So if anyone's watching out there and you're qualified, put your application in. The other thing is that with that, if we have people that are meet our criteria, the onboarding can be fairly a short process. Because we do psychological, physical exams, everything like that, check their credentials, and we could get them onboarded fairly quickly. Main thing is that we just need to have the recruits, online. That's the biggest variable, is getting people to apply.
Alderman O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my question about the whole thing is, has there ever been any analysis done if we would sever our contract with MCHS and whether there's enough profit in what we do there to cover the cost of the taxpayers paying another $300,000 in manpower each year, and how that would implement? Because I mean, it's a significant cost, and I do have support for having the additional staff there, but I think the elephant in the room is that covering our cost, or is that actually a burden and forcing this upon us to do this with additional staff? You could maybe elaborate, or I don't know how much information, but.
Sure. A couple things that I'd just like to point out. Number one, when we had the ambulance accounts thing a few years ago, we worked with finance to try to put some hard numbers on some things, and they did a lot of crunching as far as trying to figure out some of those numbers. I do not have any of those numbers on the top of the head. I know Jordan was working on a bunch of that stuff. But the second thing I want everyone to understand is that you have a tough job, and we all understand that, and I respect that. But part of this is service-based. As far as the money that we have, are we getting the best bang for our buck on the service that we provide? Putting a profit on that, on the ambulance, we're service-based, because realistically, if we get called 911 to a place where they don't have insurance, they don't have anything like that, we don't base anything of our stuff, of our services that we provide, on the ability to pay. And that's the difficult thing, and you know that. As trying to quantify that, I always try to say, I think that our department gives the citizens of this community the best bang for their buck. And that's my biggest goal, is to every dollar that comes into our budget, that we're using it in the best way, and it's justified. So I wouldn't have any numbers to be able to tell you anything like that right now. It's something that we could probably work on with finance. Sure.
Again, I don't have any specific numbers, but we've been working very close with finance, Jordan specifically. I can tell you the contracts with Marshfield Medical Center for interfacility and intercept are money makers for us. If we were to sever those, we would lose more money.
Well, that's what I was leading to, is I wasn't definitely talking about the on-call stuff in city limits. We are making money, but if I recall correctly, it wasn't a lot of money. So the real question, and we did raise them through that negotiation process last time. So it is, and it was a decent raise in the amount from what I understand. But in my mind, the real question is, if there's money to be made in there, are we making enough? I mean, obviously, the clinic isn't doing it on their own. So it's less expensive to have us do it. Is there enough money being made to supplement the 3 additional EMS firefighters? Because that's really what we're looking at. How many calls are we doing for intercepts and transfers? And how much is that taking away from our staff in the city to do that work?
Yeah, I can get you the specific numbers. I'll get your questions later, make sure I got the right, because I can run the reports. So we started running an increase in calls, and I think back to the year, but 2019, 2020, at that point, we were running so many calls, not mostly, but we ran so many interfacilities that then Chief Owen looked at it and saw that we were running enough to actually cover those 3 personnel. At the same time, the way the money was accounted for with finance, as you guys know at this point, we found out wasn't accounted for correctly. So in reality, it actually couldn't support those 3 back then. When we discovered that back in 21, again, as we've been hearing tonight about, we didn't fill those 3 positions because we knew it couldn't support it. So at this point, with the number of calls we're running, as Interim Chief Clements said, we know that it cannot support those 3 right now with the calls we're doing.
Yeah, mostly what I'm looking for is how many calls we're having, how much overtime are these transfers and interfacility transfers and stuff, taking our manpower away from the city business itself. So if you're making $20 on a call and you're funding $300,000 over the course of the year, is this something that's in our best interest to continue on? Or do we focus on our community and take care of it the best we can? And yeah, that's the big elephant in the room for me.
Okay. And again, I will get those numbers for you. I can run the reports. 2 thoughts. Marshfield Medical Center does have their own ambulances. They have them staged around the state. The number of interfacility calls we have gone down this year. Again, I'll get you those numbers. So they are working to kind of take care of themselves. In the future, they may be completely self-sufficient. Not sure. The other point I wanted to make sure was clear was these 3 personnel would be firefighter, paramedic. So with all the praise that we do appreciate from the fire recently, this is another person per shift to respond to those fires as well.
Yep, he basically took my next point, was that saying that we're all cross-staffed. It's fire, EMS, hazmat, confined space, everything like that. So yes, we have to look at the dollars and cents, but we're having some other benefits for that also for response on other times too.
Alderman Weigel.
Just one brief question here. If we delay this vote till after the SAFER grant is awarded, how does that affect you guys or the fire department?
Well, yeah, if you want to comment first, otherwise I will. It's up to you.
I'll start and then you,
okay.
You bet, clean up. All
right.
Well, in short, with this, it has to do with budgeting and where we're going to be looking at our budget for 2024. We're moving into it right now. The other thing that I wanted to just point out is in the memo is that we still will have to do 2 of those criteria of the 4 and figure out how to do that. So if we have this on board, if we are successful in the SAFER grant, we come back and we'd be able to adjust things so that we could still meet those 2 criteria, even though those 9, like I said, in Act 12, if we would get the SAFER grant, that would not count towards the maintenance of effort.
And I guess what I'd say is, my preference, and this is nothing at all against the amendment, because I totally get the purpose of the amendment, would be to, if you feel so led, go ahead and authorize that this transfer from the general fund to cover these 3 positions be put in the recommended 2024 budget, with the understanding that you'll find out by September 30th whether or not we get the SAFER grant. And if we do, in your first conversation in October, your first budget meeting, that second week of October, you can pull back on it and know that the grant is going to cover the funding. Having said that, part 2 is that we'll still have to deal with the maintenance of effort issue to make sure that the money we're getting from Madison, that we're spending in a way that we don't have the penalty issue come back at us. But I mean, my preference would be that you include it to let these people put it in the budget that I'm going to be reviewing with the finance director and others, and that we bring to you. It can always be modified or pulled out in the second week in October once we know. did we get the SAFER grant?
Oh, so then just for clarification then, we're not actually putting this in the budget. We're just going to have it in the proposed budget and we can deal with it once you go through the budget. Is that correct?
Correct. All you're doing tonight is whether or not you would allow us to put this in the recommended budget. It's not normal for us to include a transfer of this nature from one fund to another fund. So we want to know if you're empowering us to do that and put that in what you see in early October.
Okay, thank you.
So the current motion on the floor is to move this request to September after the SAFER grant is decided, to take a vote at that time.
Yeah, should I restate for clarity?
Sure.
So the official amendment, I'd like to amend the motion to not take action tonight and review as a council on the first meeting after the SAFER grant decision, which would be October 16th. Or sorry, 10th, October 10th.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, please vote. You're voting on the amendment now.
Mr. Stauber?
No.
Spiros and O'Reilly?
Some of your motion does not pass.
Now we go back to the original
Now we go
motion.
back to the original motion, which is to recommend for the 2024 budget. And we already have a motion and a second.
Hold on.
So that was for the
That was for the original.
we'll have to clear it out.
Okay.
Just wait a second here.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah. And again, right off the agenda, the recommended action is to authorize general fund transfer in the recommended 2024 budget.
Motion by Alderman Fire, second by Alderman Giles. Any other comments or questions? Alderman Spiros.
Okay, so just to be clear, I think what happened, or something that happened along the lines, is when this originally came forward and you kept using the word annually. I think that people just think annually means you're going to just do it every year. From all of the conversation here, we understand that this is going to be put in, into the 2024 budget for us to review in October. In October, we can still say no to this. Not that I'm encouraging that, but I'm just saying we can still do that. I think the annually, my assumption from your intention was so that people understood, look, we're not planning on just getting these people for 1 year and then laying them off. So every year this will be in the budget, and every October from now on out, you will still have the option of removing it at that time. If we approve it this October and we get 3 new firefighters and we don't get the SAFER grant and we're using, shared revenue, next year we'll have a decision to make. And if we can't retain them, they would get laid off. But I believe the way that Steve used the word annually was just not saying, we're just going to do this we're going to slide this under the radar and nobody notices it. That was not the intention. I think the intention was to look at the commitment of the city and the council to wanting to maintain these 3 firefighter EMTs for long term, no matter what happens with the SAFER grant or even what happens with shared revenue. That's the way I understood it, but I think using that word annually threw a lot of people off. So I hope that I'm understanding that correct, and that this vote today would be simply that we are going to look at it. We are going to allow them to put it into the budget for October for our review and our approval in October, and that our intention is to somehow keep these people long-term and not to lay them off in 1 year. So I hope that I understood that correctly, but I just wanted to restate that because that's the way that I'm taking what you said.
Yeah, you do. And to walk through it, an example, how it would play out is you authorize us to put it in the recommended 2024 budget. We go through the process. You authorize the transfer as part of the approved budget for 2024. If there's no other funding sources that come to our attention that we can use, you're likely to see the recommended 2025 budget included again, when once again, it will be your decision as to whether to re-up. I guess what I don't want to soft pedal in all this, despite the fact it's your decision every single year, is the commitment, hopefully, that once we bring people on, it's our intention to the greatest ability possible to keep them rather than to have them here for a short time and then have to let them go. But certainly your decision is always there every year, as it is with everything else that we put before you in October.
Okay, please vote, everyone.
Mr. Stauber?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. And thank you, Chief.
Thank you for your time.
Item P, request to approve revised resolution number 2023-46 related to the acquisition of property for the Adler Road Trail Project presented by Tom Turchi, Public Works Director.
Thank you. As you recall, we discussed this 2 weeks ago, and one of the discussion items we had that evening between Mr. Wagner and I was that he brought up state statute 32/05, which talks about eminent domain. We cannot use eminent domain in this process, but I actually had a reference to it in the original resolution, and the DOT asked me to remove it. So I'm here basically took 2 paragraphs out and referring this back to the council for approval. So I'd approve the right-of-way plat and revised relocation order, and further authorize the Director of Public Works to sign the right-of-way plat on the behalf of the city. So
We have a motion on the floor by Alderman Fire, second by Alderman Varsho. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mr. Stauber?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
thank you.
Item Q, request on results of survey regarding cat declawing and possible next steps presented by Steve Bark, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start out by thanking Tom Laux, our Communications Director, for his work, again, using the public input tool to find out what our citizens are thinking. I believe he's put in front of you an updated document that has the information we received from that survey, including comments made by the individuals who responded to the 3 questions that were involved. Just a little bit of history. Councilmember Giles brought this up back in late May. Then we discussed it in June. He found a good speaker, Jennifer Conrad, to make a presentation on July 11th. And now it's before you with this information from public input as to what the citizens of Marshfield think. In each of the questions, we had somewhere between 100 and 200 responses and the comments that came with it. I'm going to walk through them real briefly. The question about whether people believe that cat declawing is inhumane, 61% of those who responded said yes, 39% no. On the issue of whether we should have an ordinance to prohibit it, it was 50-50, divided between yes and no. Those who saw the presentation that Jennifer made back in July, about 1 in 5, 19% witnessed that presentation at some point on our platforms or somewhere. So kind of where I see us at this point is there does seem to be support to continue this conversation when you have half or more of the people believing that it's either inhumane or that we ought to look at an ordinance. My recommendation tonight would be to set aside the first part of the next council meeting on September 12th as a public input session, get the word out through all our platforms, contact citizens, contact the local veterinarians. Anybody who wants to come can come and step forward and make some comments, favorable or unfavorable. Have on the agenda for later that evening the council to discuss whether they want to move forward with an ordinance. And if the decision is yes, based upon what we've read here and what we've heard that night, that we do want to pursue an ordinance that would ban cat declawing in the city of Marshfield, then we would work with the city attorney's office and bring forth an ordinance for first reading, presumably as early as the second meeting in September. That's my recommendation of how to move forward based upon what you're looking at. I will say that if you look at the comments, you see the themes that I think maybe some of us expected. One camp saying that, in fact, this is inhumane and there should be banned. Another camp maybe questioning whether or not the city has a role in this. But the public has spoken, and like I said, that would be my recommendation for the next steps.
We have a motion on the floor by Alderman Giles to move forward with what City Administrator Barg has proposed. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Stauber. Any other discussion? Alderman Tompkins?
I just want to thank Tom for breaking down some of these comments because there were quite a few people who didn't live in Marshfield who responded to this. And I just think it's really important that when we look at this data, we're looking at the data of Marshfield residents. So I would just request that if we do have a public forum and we use data, that we're only using data that came from Marshfield residents.
Yeah, we'll just use the residents that were computed in this last version that Tom gave us. When people come to the podium, if they do on September 12th, if in fact the council wants to take this step, we'll definitely ask them, for their name and address. And, I'm not saying that nobody can speak if they don't live in the city of Marshfield, but you're obviously going to give weight to people who are residents of the city expressing their opinion on this topic.
Alderman O'Reilly?
Thank you. Just one clarifying question. Under the age of the participants, there appears to be a large section that's others that has 0%. I'm curious if maybe Tom could clarify if he's available. Not sure what that means. Oh, that's that. Color's a little.
Yeah, I'm not positive at that point. I'll get back to you on it and look at what the other means in there.
I think I might have figured it out.
Okay, yeah, let us know.
I think it's the 26 to 35 class, but the color is just very different between the pie chart. And
okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, Alderman O'Reilly. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. No other comments? Please vote.
Can you repeat both?
We're actually going to the public forum for the next council meeting.
Yeah, I can't make motions, but I can repeat what I said. And then if somebody wants to clarify that was in fact their motion, it would be to schedule the first part of the September 12th council meeting as a public input session for comment regarding a proposed ordinance to ban cat declawing, and followed up with an item on that agenda, council discussion to consider whether to proceed.
So who would like to actually make that motion? Because obviously Steve is not able to.
It was already, yeah, it was.
Okay. Then we have a motion and a second.
Does that work?
Perfect. Okay, everybody vote. See what happens.
Mr. Stauber?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. We'll see you back in 2 weeks. Item R, request to approve appointment of Sarah Terrell, 408 North Chestnut Avenue, to the Committee on Aging to complete an unexpired term ending in April of 2025, presented by me, Lois. There's no action taken at this meeting. The final action will be set for September 12th meeting. Item S, suggested items for further agendas. Seeing none, we will adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin Statutes, Chapter 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Sale of property on Mill Creek Business Park, 2024 Affairs Management Agreement, relocation of Communications Department, contract for services for implementation of West 2nd Street redevelopment plan, and closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes, Chapter 19.851G, conferring with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to legality in which it is or is likely to become involved, potential claim against the city related to a former city landfill, and number 2, update on claims for unlawful tax made by Marshfield Clinic, and closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes, Chapter 19.851C, considering employment promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, recovery of social engineering loss resulting from payments issued to vendors. We have a motion by Alderman Spears, a second by Alderman O'Reilly. Whew. Ooh, baby, okay.
Good
Excuse
job.
me. All those in favor of going in closed session, please vote.
Mr. Stauber?
Yes.
We are in closed session, Chief.